I just finished a piece of music here in the studio, and I thought before I broke down the patch, put it all away, I would talk through the inspiration for the piece, the structure of the piece, the realization of the piece, how it all came together. It's quite a long piece. It's almost an hour long, which is pretty long for the stuff I usually do. It's in 3 sections. Okay, so the piece is called Raw Moon. Raw Moon. Raw as in raw, R-A-W, raw, like sushi, and the moon as in the satellite that orbits the Earth. Raw Moon. It's in 3 sections. The first 2 are a little bit longer than the third, and the total is about an hour. So the piece is really inspired by an image of the surface of the moon. It's an image that was published by NASA maybe 10, 15 or so years ago. And it's a startlingly clear, austere, stark image of the surface of the moon taken by this orbiter. So very close, very clear, very just a very pure image, almost like a spiritual portal. And this is not the first time that I've tried to work musically with that image. In fact, earlier, also about 10 or 15 years ago, I was very interested in using images to create sound, like directly, technology, using a process where the image directly mapped to vectors of sound. And I will talk more about this in other videos. If you're interested in hearing more about this sonification process, let me know in the comments, and I will spend some more time on it. But for this piece, basically what it is, if you do a spectrographic analysis of a sound, you end up with an output that is a graphic representation of that sound, showing the change of frequency over windows of time, and the different vectors in terms of how granular the buckets of available frequency or the windows of measurement of time, how those map to the sound in the image, really dictate what the image looks like. And in reverse, then, when you find software applications that will run kind of reverse transform analysis, the mapping of those vectors is highly correlated to the output. Now, I still find that approach poetically very satisfying. I think the resonance between image and music is quite beautiful, but the aesthetic output, the composition output, is rarely as interesting. Now, in this case, it was quite successful, and the piece was performed or played at a space arts workshop out at the NASA Ames facility. I think it was the 7th International Space Arts Workshop. I can probably double check because look, I went out with my friend Lowry, and on the same trip we took a side visit to the SETI headquarters, which was like a little treat for a couple of nerdy fanboys of aliens. So out at Ames, I played this piece. It's 28 minutes long, and it's really made up of sine waves and static. So it's quite it's quite an ordeal to ask people to listen to it. But it's also has this wonderful shape of simplicity to complexity, and then back to simplicity, as you would expect of a piece that was based on the circular face of the moon, and then the different attributes and characteristics of the image were reflected in the different timbres that occur electronically. So I thought, wouldn't it be great to notate this and then orchestrate it for an ensemble, maybe a pitched percussion ensemble, or even I thought maybe for a solo piano, and arrange it in a way that I could play myself. And to do that, I used additional software that took the same sound file, but instead of producing a spectrogram, the analysis would be a formatted file where the peak harmonics at any given moment were identified and then exported as an XML file. That XML file that can then be read into a MIDI output or MIDI player, and from there, Bob's your uncle. You can do all kinds of things. What I did though was import it into Sibelius and create a written score, with the idea being then that I could run through this and simplify it, because similar to how if you use something like Sibelius to capture your real-time improvisation, it's astonishingly accurate, but that accuracy makes it not quite so useful because it will capture any inconsistencies in the synchronicity of the beat, any weird sort of nested tuplets to account for phrasing will appear in the score. And although it may play back accurately, it's a very difficult thing to read. So I figured I would go through it, simplify the notation, and then see if I could put it into a performative score. I tried a couple of times and was never successful, particularly for the idea of a piano piece. Maybe for pitched percussion and handbells or something like that. Maybe that would be interesting and effective. But for piano, I thought maybe I could simplify some of the sections. In others, I thought maybe I could articulate and notate the gestures that I heard in the electronic version, and then work on those as kind of like an inserted composer. But I haven't been able to do it well. What I have been able to do is then take that score and run it as a controller into my Eurorack system, which is right behind me here. And in particular, I used the Make Noise No Coast semi-modular and the Make Noise Morphogene. So the No Coast is a standalone oscillator with some wave shaping. It has quite a beautiful, it's a single oscillator, but it has quite a beautiful range of sound. And then the Morphogene allows me to take samples, but then interact with it as if it were physical tape. Like I could take, if I have a sample that's a minute long, I could identify a window of a minute down to a very, very short fraction of time, and then move that window over the tape and focus on a very narrow part and repeat that and then modify it. So there's a very wide range of textures and voices that are available directly from the Morphogene. I took 28 loops from the 28 minutes and reproduced them on the Make Noise. Then I recorded those. There are, interestingly, out of all of those sections, there's really two families of textures that unfolded, that emerged. And this was a surprise to me, a delightful surprise. The first dozen or so are very rhythmic and lend themselves to resonant bell sounds that kind of weave in and out of each other in these very complex, twitchy little rhythms, building in complexity within each loop, right? The loop 2 is more complex than loop 1, loop 3 more than loop 2. So I would play those, and as I played them, I would experiment with the available settings on the No Coast, so the timbre would change quite significantly. And then I would find one that I liked, I'd lock into it, and I would use that. So that's the first set of sounds. And so the first set of the piece, the first of the 3 sections, I call bells, and it's made up of these different loops, with 2 sort of compositional attributes or two compositional methods applied to it. Right. On the one hand, I did take the morphogene within each loop, and while it was playing, I would find some small element of it that would create a halo around the original, and in some cases, I would manipulate that in real time, create a second voice. And then throughout the first section, I am also layering more loops on top of each other. So while loop 6 is more complex than loop 5, loop 7 layers on top of loop 6, and loop 8 layers on top of loop 7 and 6, builds up. So there's a sort of a natural build-up of complexity through the section. So I'm going to play. In a minute, I'll turn around and demonstrate some of this on the morphogene. But the second set of music, then, for the first set are the bells. The second set I call birds, and that's because this sort of delightful melodic gestural polyphony emerged. And I use polyphony in the same sense that you would think of it with a Bach cello suite, where the line is monophonic. But because of the accents and the different layers implied within the monophonic harmony, or monophonic texture, you get the sense of harmony. And with these pieces, with the bird pieces, the morphogene would be with the highly disjoint melodic structures across the range of the oscillator. And I did in these cases also use some reverb, just a little bit. And in fact, in the bell section, I used no FX whatsoever, not even reverb. It's very dry, very austere. But because of that reverb, it added in this extra sort of poppy texture that's quite lovely. That's birds. And then the third section, the shortest section, is called echoes. And in that section, I'm directly using the morphogene control. So for about 10 minutes, I'm dialing into specific textures on the morphogene. So bells, birds, echoes. Interestingly, none of those exist on the surface of the moon. Of course, there's no air for sound to move through. There's no air for birds to breathe. And so there are no echoes.